forgot. So as we are getting started tonight, I just want to invite you to apply that definition to what we're talking about, because I'm going to treat it a little bit like a speaker meeting. I'm going to share, speak in the I and share my story. And in doing that, I want to talk about what it means to be supportable, and talk about the difference in support versus help. And I think sometimes the discrepancy in support versus help is really hard to decipher, especially if I'm in the thick of it. I know I've shared before permission to disagree with anything I've said and say. And I know I've shared before that it is my opinion as a recovering codependent that being addicted to a person, a live person, a loved one, is very different than being addicted to an inanimate object or a behavior. And that's only my judgment. That's only my opinion. But I want to talk a little bit tonight about what that means and what that looks like. And it isn't about what's right or wrong and what's good or bad, but it is a story that I'm going to share with you guys. And remember, if you don't identify with things I say, that's a good thing. So permission. And if you do identify with things I say, please know I am not the standard. I'm only disclosing and sharing so that it colors things in and you're able to apply what it looks like for you in your story. And I'm going to look down because I wrote some notes. And before I get started, I want to acknowledge that energetically, fall is a time of death and letting go. And so frequently in my industry, this is when we're really busy. And I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean it very lovingly and honestly, because even though we may not be able to articulate or notice the grief and loss that's happening, it's very real. And there's a lot of patterns this time of year. So grief is usually one of the biggest topics that we talk about this time of year. And I always say, this is an Amberism, you can laugh at this. Hallmark lies. It ain't the happiest time of the year. And I say that if that's how you're feeling and that's what's coming up for you, please know that you're not alone. And I'm going to share some aspects of my story, and I'm just going to own that I'm in some grief tonight. So there may be some emotions in some of this, because as I was making notes on what I was going to share, I just feel things coming up. So if you're not familiar, part of my story has to do with growing up in a home of addiction, growing up in a home where using things outside of my body was modeled in order to make one feel better. And what that looks like and what that means is I grew up on a farm. So if we were sick, we needed to go outside and get some fresh air and pick some tomatoes, because that still had to happen. And the fresh air would cure usually it was strep throat, not penicillin. Another way that looked is when you come home from work and you have a hard day, as the youngest of four, the expectation was to be seen and not heard, but to always be available to bring a beverage. Meaning if dad ran out of his Busch beer, we knew that whoever was closest needed to go to the outside fridge with a salt shaker, because he wanted us to pop it, apply salt to the top, and put it on the inside. I've been doing that since I was about 4. Also, according to him, would frequently be called the best bartender because I would put extra olives in his martini and bring it to him at night. And that was a big deal for me, to be the good girl and the good bartender at 4, 5, and 6 years old. So outside of my body, alcohol, pills, TV, I didn't know it at the time, but porn, sex, codependency, people pleasing, those were the things that were supposed to make us feel better. When life got hard, when we overworked, when we didn't feel good, when we didn't have control over things, using numbing and medicating is what was modeled for how I get to feel better. And I can remember as young as 4 making martinis and running on beer runs. And if we were driving down the road and a cop drove by, he would shove the martini back in the back seat with us, and we would hold it between our legs because I guess he thought no police officer would check the kids for alcohol. So it didn't matter what the cause of the feeling bad was, something outside of us was supposed to make that feel better. And growing up, it was easy for me to blame the alcohol because that I could see, or the pills. And it was really confusing and really hard because when there was just enough alcohol, he was really nice. When there was just enough alcohol, he would call me sweetheart. But as soon as he crossed that imaginary line, it goes downhill really quick. And it was like 2 different people, Jekyll and Hyde. And I would learn really quickly at a really young age to keep track of how many he had so I could figure out what that line was. And so the older I got, the more I realized the alcohol, or I thought, was the problem. And so the older I got, the braver I got, because I felt very responsible. I mean, he even handed me the martini cup in the car to hide it from the police officers. So obviously I had some power. And probably around age 10 or 11 was the first time I came home really angry, and I poured out all of his alcohol. And I was so scared, I was shaking because I didn't know what he was going to do to me when he came home, but I was going to dump it all out. And so I did. And then I wrote a letter with as many reasons why he should stop as I could think of. And I probably had a lot of them. It was probably 3 or 4 pages by the time I finished. And at 10 or 11 years old, my dad worked shift work. And so he was on second shift the first time I did this. And so I knew how far away from home he was, and I knew he'd be home between 11:10 and 11:15. So at 10 or 11 years old, I would sit on the couch and wait up for him to tell him when he came in that I dumped it all out, and I would hand him the letter, and the expectation was he would stop. Well, that didn't happen. And it got real scary. And he got real scary because when one is suffering from so much pathology, the reason they're numbing and medicating is because they're already in pain. The root of numbing and medicating is pain. It's trauma. So my trauma was experiencing him in this way. And then my trauma was taking responsibility for his pathology. By the time I was 14 or 15, I would hide his keys and his wallet so he couldn't leave. Because if he left without me to go to the turkey shoot, which I was so sheltered, I really thought they released turkeys in a pasture and they would go and shoot them. That's funny. You can laugh at that. But it's actually just a target that one sees how close they can get to the middle, and then you get a frozen turkey. But he would drink heavily before he would go to the turkey shoot. And if he wouldn't take me with him, I would hide his keys in his wallet. And that didn't go well. He didn't like that. And if things weren't done well on the farm, or we hadn't picked the vegetables that day, he would get really angry. And sometimes what that would look like would not be a hit with an open hand. It would be a fist on the top of the head. And so probably for 2 decades, I was one saying, oh no, I was never spanked. No, I was never hit, because a hit to me was open-handed. So I would dump pills by the time I was 18 or 19. And by the time I was 20, I was working at Baptist Hospital in Columbia on the child and adolescent psych floor, which gave me a lot of resources and a lot of power. And because I'm a recovering codependent, I was a really good worker. And the doctors really trusted me and they liked the work that I did. And so fortunately and unfortunately, I could ask questions when it got bad. And by the time I was 20, I committed him to his first inpatient. Not my mom, me, youngest of 4. And he wasn't happy about that. And the thing I never got in each of these experiences, dumping pills, dumping alcohol, hiding things, my intention was to save him. My intention was to protect him. But what my actions were was control. I believed that I could make a difference. And if I could figure out the right way to do it and the right way to say it, and not back down from him, that somehow magically that was going to work. And I thought I was helping. And by the time I was 21, I'd already committed him. He'd already had gastric bypass surgery, which he should have never been approved for. He was over 300 pounds my whole life and had this surgery. And if you're not familiar with that surgery, it's when it first happened. And it's far more rigid around eating a certain amount, drinking a certain amount than it is today. It's when they would create a pouch in the stomach and leave the rest, but there was no give or take. It was really rigid. And someone suffering from addiction is all or nothing. He should have never been approved for that surgery. So what it also meant is, although he had switched to O'Doul's, which is alcohol-free beer, what it also meant is he got drunk quicker. And so there was no more, by the time he gets to 8, he passes the imaginary line. Now it was usually after 1 drink, but he was pouring vodka in the O'Doul's cans. So my intention in sharing all this is to not pick on my father at all. It is to show my pathology. It is to show the extreme measures that, starting at 4 years old and going until he took his own life when I was 24, the effort that I thought I could put in to save him, and the lack of logic, the lack of rationalization, the inability to recognize it didn't matter what I did. I didn't have that kind of power. And when we talk about codependency, oftentimes stories like mine are the ones that are used. And I don't frequently tell my story this way. If you've ever been to a speaker meeting, it's a lot more like a speaker meeting tonight. But my intention on sharing this was to show I can put locks on a window, I can hide keys, I can really do anything, and he would have found a way through the ceiling tiles to get out. The powerlessness that was motivating my actions created my insanity. He was chasing alcohol and I was chasing him. So my level of addiction and how sick I got, or maybe was most of my life, depending on the lens that you look at it, it's all I knew. I had no other examples of what a father-daughter relationship should look like, and I have no doubt my sisters, because I'm the youngest of 4, did many of the same things that I did. And I intentionally today in my recovery teach a lot about what is support and what is help. Because every effort that I tried to do for him, although it was all the wrong things for the right reasons, pushed him further towards his addiction. It was so shaming for him. It was so belittling and degrading for a little girl, a daughter, to be trying to right size or correct a father who was also a Navy chief. So, yes, you could say I had a lot of courage, or you could say I had a lot of something else. And all I did was try to help. And when I help, it hurt. I didn't know of ACA then. I only knew of AA, which is where I was trying to get him to go. But there wasn't the resources then. I'm 43 now. This was 18 years ago. There wasn't the resources then that exist now to develop the discrepancy of help and support. I'm able to stay in my dignity and my self-respect and love another person without shaming them and without controlling them. And what that looks like is support. Help is me doing for someone what they are capable of doing themselves. I was the parent in every scenario that I just laid out. And I was treating him as if he was the kid. Support looks like I get to stay in my role as a child, and my mom would have been getting me resources while setting boundaries with him so that our home was safer. Support from adult to adult looks like I'm going to support you in you doing what you're capable of doing. I'm not going to do it for you because I don't have that type of power. I don't have any influence over what someone else is going to do or not do. What I do have control over is me. My relationship with him changed as soon as I turned 16 and I started working, because the more I was away from him, the safer I was. So when we talk about boundaries today, it is my responsibility to make sure that I honor my boundaries. It's no one else's job to follow them. And if I don't feel safe, it's my job to make changes to my world so that I do. The challenging part in this is when the people that are supposed to love and protect me happen to also be the people that are hurting me. I don't learn how to do that. I don't learn how to set boundaries. I didn't know what safety felt like until I was an adult. I didn't know I wasn't in safety. I can't know what I don't know. So when we look at support versus help and we start to utilize things like boundaries, oftentimes that reparenting component is what I refer to when I say we create a family of choice so that those around me, well, I'll speak in the I create a family of choice because those around me oftentimes love me better than I love me. Because the way I was taught was not love, it was codependency. And what was continuing on that existed way before my dad was addiction and trauma. So to be able to use things like boundaries is support. And it's okay if other people don't view my boundaries as support, because if they're in an acting out stage, they don't even have access to that part of their brain. Remember the prefrontal cortex, decision making, analyzing, and logic? That's off when I'm in a trauma response. That is off when I'm in a stress response or when I'm surviving. What is on and driving the bus is fight, flight, freeze, fawn. That's it. I can't think about, should I go the interstate or the back roads when I'm in survival? So utilizing boundaries is going to be really hard, which is the intention of family of choice, which is the intention of a recovery community. Because so often I need access to behaviors that my body has never experienced. If you come from a backstory like this, or maybe you come from an alternative backstory that is like a pendulum swing, and I really didn't see, or I didn't experience physical abuse, but what I did experience was emotional neglect. I didn't experience verbal abuse, but what I did experience was a lack of love. Those outcomes, they're the same. It looks different, but the all or the nothing creates the same outcome. I'm still not getting what I need. And I still don't have a frame of reference or wasn't taught, how do I use boundaries? How do I love me? What does it look like to love me? What I'm taught is boundary-less, all or nothing. So when it starts to look like, Amber, now I have a loved one and they're pretty sick and I'm trying really hard to stay in my recovery and their pathology is really affecting my recovery, what do I do? We go back to basics. Remember 8th grade PE class? It's okay if you don't remember this. Maslow's hierarchy. Food, shelter, water, safety. Safety and emotional security. Those are the bottom two. You know why? Because as soon as I'm in survival, those are the things that go away. So we go back to basics. Whether I'm acting out and I'm in my own addiction of substance or behaviors, which for me looks like people pleasing or workaholism, or if I'm using a substance, if I'm acting out, numbing and medicating, my way back is back to basics. It's back to my recovery, which tells me I need to first figure out how to feel emotionally safe. And if I haven't eaten, or I'm not taking breaks, or I'm not taking care of myself, I can't get to a place of emotional safety because the bottom is food, shelter, water, safety, right? So neglecting myself isn't the answer. What is the answer is my meetings, my basic needs, and my fellow travelers. because what's going to get reflected back to me is my worth and what I deserve. And that's not going to always be my go-to. So I can get to a place of support versus help. And what that means is it still doesn't mean I have control over my loved one. It still doesn't mean they're in a place of being supportable. Which, what does that do? Spin me right back out. So just because mine doesn't look like alcohol and I choose not to drink a martini or any alcohol, just because mine doesn't look like alcohol doesn't mean I don't spin out. And just because I make it to a meeting today doesn't mean tomorrow's going to be easy. What it does mean is some days I'm going minute by minute too. I'm going hour by hour too. And I think so often our culture thinks that if I don't struggle with the brown paper bag or the liquor bottle, that I don't have to go minute by minute. And that's not true, because somebody I care about is hurting. So back to basics, back to my community, and back to my fellow travelers is how I stay in alignment with my recovery, regardless of what my loved ones are doing. I don't get to control that. And I know that's not easy to hear, and I know it's not easy to feel. And for some of us, it's minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. No different than any other program. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I hope that this was supportive in applying to your story, how your recovery may show up, but also some solutions with that. I'll share more at the end. But the difference in support and help is vital when I'm looking at what I can do and what I'm capable of, and how I can love another person, because codepending them is not love. And remembering that if this is bringing up things in your body, mine is, and if this is affecting maybe how deep your breath is or how present you feel in this moment, that hand over heart releases the same chemicals in my brain that a hug does. So if you're feeling triggered in this moment, the invitation to just try hand over heart and just notice what happens. Because that's what I can influence. That's what I have control over. I don't have any control over what's out here. What holds us in dysfunctional patterns is our role. When we look at, we haven't done this one in a while, so if you haven't heard this one, it's on the website. But when we stay in our role of hero, mascot, chief enabler, lost child, or scapegoat, as an adult, if I function within that role, that's what continues the dysfunctional patterns. And so frequently you guys might have heard me say, nope, not ready to put that down yet. Boundaries are really helpful, and it doesn't matter if I put a physical boundary of moving from one end of the United States to the other end of the United States. It's not gonna heal what's already wounded. And I totally understand the logic behind it for so many people, because I was one of those people at one time. And that cutting it off, the all or the nothing, is still part of the pathology. It also does not mean that everything has to be forgiven and forgotten. I don't at all want to excuse any behaviors or justify any behaviors. My program, the principle of my program, ACA, is it's not about blame and fault. It's just about fact. So I don't need to hurt anyone else for me to prove my wound. When I stay in my role of dysfunction, which mine was hero and mascot, I keep helping people. I keep enabling people. I continue to take responsibility for things that are not mine to be responsible for. And so even though I might be a 40-year-old woman, I will notice the patterns in my relationship continue to be dysfunctional, whether my mom and dad are here or not. And the avenue or the reason that that shows up is because I'm still fulfilling my role. So in my role of dysfunction, when I'm enabling or pleasing or taking responsibility for other people's safety, recovery, whatever, I will notice my own insanity continues. You guys have heard me say that before. I feel crazy as shit when I'm in a relapse. And that's a feeling in my body. That's not and I also I use dark humor. So I don't mean any disrespect by that either, but it's not a cognition thing. It's a feeling thing. And the way that I step out of that, or the way that I get back in alignment, is there is a reparenting tool called Loving Parent. And there's 4 roles of loving parent in the ACA world. It's nurturing, protecting, guiding, and loving. So when you guys are describing your experience, strength, and hope, and it is this, sometimes I can't see the forest for the trees when I'm so in it. And that is what happens to us because we're humans, not because we're in recovery. When I can't see the forest for the trees and I have safe people or my fellow travelers to say, can you help me? Can I process this with you? I can't see what's happening. I just know it feels really bad. One of those roles is what I'm needing: nurture, protect, guide, or love. Today, as a mom, as a recovering codependent and an ACA, when I am physically sick, I'll catch my ass walking outside getting sunshine. Not that that's not healthy grounding, but it's not going to fix strep throat. Like, it's not. And it's the insanity. It's so, I think Sarah, or I'm sorry, I can't remember who said this, but it's my template. It's so automatic for me. It's like breathing. And that's not bad or wrong. My recovery gives me the gift of self-awareness. Awareness is like, why are you standing out here looking at the sunshine? You got 102-degree fever. You need to go to the doctor. You need penicillin or an antibiotic, not the sunshine. So that level of self-awareness, that being embodied and in my body, the loving of a nurturing parent to say, honey, you're sick, go to the doctor, rather than self-criticism or judgment or avoidance. That's what I need. That's what helps me step out of that dysfunctional role and back in alignment with me. That's how I reparent me to do differently than was done to me. So nurture, protect, love, and guide. There are many times I say in this meeting, I feel so honored by the people that surround me, because sometimes they love me better than I love me. And I need those examples. I need people to show me and reflect back to me what I'm worth, because it's not a part of my template. It is a part of my everyday recovery process. So when I'm looking at, am I supporting or am I helping? The first person that I need to look at in order to decide that is, am I nurturing, protecting, loving, and guiding me? And in turn, I can offer that to someone else because I then have the capacity. But if I'm not doing that for me, I can't give that to anyone else because it'll be help. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. I hope this was supportive in helping to color in some of how different it can look, but how so similar we can feel as humans. It won't always be Jerry Springer. And just because it's not Jerry Springer doesn't mean it's not trauma, doesn't mean it didn't affect me. Yeah. just the reminder of the other tool that I shared, which is recognizing my powerlessness. And a way that I love me is putting my hand over heart. And now you're probably going to notice that I do it a lot. I even do it with my selenite. But I want to invite you to try that for a little while, even when you don't need it, to notice what happens in your body. When we release oxytocin, that is the love hormone that when we have a newborn, we release. That reparenting me in that way, I will feel it in my body. And it's going to reestablish that emotional safety on Maslow's hierarchy. So I can do to me differently than was done to me by one very simple little act. And sometimes it feels so big, we think the tool needs to be that big, but in actuality, it's back to basics. It's back to the simple things. So I hope this was helpful for you guys. Thanks for letting me share. I'm sorry I ran over.